Ladies and gentlemen, our program will now begin. Please welcome the CEO of the Churchill Club, Karen Tucker.
Hello, welcome. Thank you so very much. My name is Karen Tucker. I'm CEO at the Churchill Club. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. In the wake of major attacks on Sony, Target, OPM, Ashley Madison, and many others, cybersecurity, the topic of our discussion this evening, has taken center stage in boardrooms, across the media landscape, and in conversations of national security and defense. Tonight we are privileged to have with us 4 distinguished leaders to share their views about up-to-the-minute cybersecurity issues, trends, strategies, and implications for the future. They are Ken Shih of Fortinet, Mike Brown of Symantec, Mark McLaughlin of Palo Alto Networks, and Chris Young of Intel Security Group. Now, although they are competitors, the 4 companies led by our speakers have chosen to work together as part of an organization called the Cyber Threat Alliance to share threat information in good faith with the ultimate aim to better protect their organizations and their customers. Here to lead them in discussion is Danny Yadron, cybersecurity reporter from the Wall Street Journal. But before we begin, some thanks are in order. First, to our program partners, Fortinet, Intel Security, Palo Alto Networks, and Symantec. Thank you so much for making this possible. Special thanks also to Mark Farley of Deloitte, Drew Del Matteo, and Sandra Wheatley of Fortinet. A few words about Churchill Club for our new guests. We are a preeminent technology and business forum operating here in the San Francisco Bay Area since 1985. Whenever we have speakers who come to the stage, we always respectfully request that they refrain from pitching, but rather look at this appearance as an opportunity to advance collective understanding, to add new insights to the conversation, and to shine a light on opportunities for innovation, for economic growth, and societal benefit. So we've been privileged to be convening people and with one another and important ideas since around the time of Windows 1.0. Next up, the morning of November 18, we present the president of Stanford University and the chancellor of UC Berkeley talking about the future of higher education and what's at stake. We'll have plenty of other exciting programs for you in this, our 30th anniversary year. I'll just mention a couple of them. On January 21st, we have Brad Katsuyama of IEX and Flash Boys fame, together with the author Michael Lewis. And then on March 1st, we're going to welcome the Oscar-nominated actor James Caan with business and leadership lessons from The Godfather. For more on these and other upcoming programs, you know you can always get the details at churchillclub.org. One last thing, if you are tweeting tonight, please do use the hashtag Churchill Club, and you will find other Twitter pointers in your programs. So with that, let's give a very warm Churchill Club welcome to our speakers.
Folks. So as mentioned, my name is Danny Yadron. I am the cybersecurity reporter for the Wall Street Journal. I'm based up in San Francisco. And that beat these days ranges everything from all of the incidents previously mentioned to some of the stuff with surveillance and what some call cyber war. But we have much more interesting people here than me. We have Michael Brown, the chief executive of Symantec since 2014. And he's previously the chairman and CEO of Quantum Storage. We have Mark McLaughlin, right there. Hey, these are actually in order. What do you know?
Well, we don't know that yet.
I think that was by design.
The chair and CEO of Palo Alto Networks. And he's previously the president of VeriSign, which plays a key role in the management of the internet with some root name servers. He's also worked at Signio. And I'm going to mispronounce the name of, is it Kerr? Or how do you?
Oh, don't even worry about that. So long ago. So we'll just move on.
He's also on the board of
Ken.
O-Power and Qualcomm. Ken G, the CEO and chairman of Fortinet, founded in 2000, and he has worked through a string of security companies. His first, SIS, while he was at Stanford in 1993. And then Chris Young, we have the general manager at Intel Security. That includes brands such as McAfee, which is both known for antivirus and the antics of a certain former executive.
He's running for president, I heard.
I don't think Intel would hire him these
Sorry.
days.
Sorry, Chris. Before that, he was the VP at Cisco Security, also an exec at RSA, the security unit of EMC and VMware. So obviously, these are some very accomplished folks in the business of security, which is, a multi-billion-dollar industry that is growing as the cyber threat is growing. And so whenever I talk to my editors about the business of cybersecurity, they sort of cut me off mid-sentence. And they go, yeah, but if this business is so big and growing, why does this keep happening? The Targets, the Home Depots, the Ashley Madisons. And I realize that sounds like an unfair question, but I'm curious for your take. To a layperson, despite the security industry, why do we keep reading about these things? Whoever wants to.
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I think that's like looking at the progress in the medical industry over the last 100 years and saying, why do people still get sick? What the industry is doing to stop attacks is actually pretty staggering because there's, by some estimates, 80 to 90 million attacks a year. So at Symantec, we analyze 10 trillion security incidents a year. So it's amazing there aren't more breaches that happen. So the industry clearly needs to play the cat and mouse game with the attackers who get ever more sophisticated, but they will continue to try and evade whatever defensive techniques we put in place. So as we play that game, we're going to get smarter and better in protecting you, but there's so many of them, they're so persistent, it's a very, very big problem.
Also, you see, internet today is quite different than 40, 50 years ago when it started. That time only connect some government, some university. Now pretty much everybody use internet and all the application leverage internet, and also a lot of devices starting to connect to the internet. So that's increased a lot of productivity, but also a lot of other risks, because so far the internet architecture is still more connection-based, IP address based. So you don't know what's in the other end. So they only deal with layer 2, layer 3 issue. They don't look at what's the content, what's the application, what's the user behind. So that's where the security companies step in. And so we have 2 million FortiGate actually deployed globally, handle 50 trillion connection every day. You can see how many risks that can be involved. So there's a lot of connection. That's also what generates a lot of risk because you don't know what's in the other end. So that's the issue created.
I think there's, I think while there's a lot happening in cyber today, look, the reality is most of cybersecurity has kind of been buried as a back office function in IT in most organizations for most of our history. It's only been the last couple of years that the president of the United States is getting involved, that boards of directors are paying attention to the problem. So we have a huge debt in most organizations that now is finally people are starting to say, okay, we need to pay this debt down. I mean, anybody who works in any company would tell you, like, most times you don't focus on fixing the problems until the CEO and the board kind of say, hey, this is a real problem, we're gonna go after it and fix it. This is a complex problem. It needs a lot of attention, and there's a huge debt. And I think that debt is now starting to be paid, but the criminals are cashing in on the debt right now.
Yeah, I think real high level, we're dealing with a math problem at the end of the day. And the math problem is that the cost of compute power has declined dramatically over time and will keep doing so. No reason that's going to change. Tons of productivity, as Ten mentioned, has come off of that. From a security perspective, though, as the cost of compute power goes down, the number of sophistication attacks go up. It's just cheaper for attacks to occur. So it's a highly automated adversary, right? Enjoying that. On the flip side, all of us playing defense, good guys, right? We're working with a 50-year-old internet. Legacy architectures have built over decades, and that tends to be more and more manual response. You have a highly automated adversary and a very manual setup from a response to protect situation. So the math is just dramatically, out of whack. That's why it's happening all the time, right? So that math curve has to flip on its head. Like that's what ultimately has to happen at the end of the day is that the cost of a successful attack, not an attack, a successful attack has to go up exponentially from what it is today in order for the incidence of these things to drop.
One of the financial analysts estimated that the cost of a breach is 10 times what we're spending to defend against them. So
really?
It illustrates what Mark is saying. So it is a math problem. We probably have never spent so much on cybersecurity as a society, but we're not spending enough to prevent it.
And I want to come back to that cost of a breach later on in this conversation, but you all, in your answers there, mentioned something interesting where, the internet basically wasn't built for what we're doing with it, and, you talk about math. Is it possible, to actually fix this, especially at least on the back end or after the fact with security companies like yours? You called it a math problem. Can we ever solve that equation?
Well, I'll start since I brought the math. Well, there's been different theories on that. One is to redo the internet.
People have said that with a straight face.
No, I know people. Well, there's been some straight face. Well, there is something else. There's the military has their own version, right?
Yeah.
So there are things out there like that. The banking industry has talked about having a new internet just for the banking industry. So I think that just goes to show the level of desperation, for lack of a better term, of using this legacy architecture to say, let's just start over. But in all those sort of conversations, you just immediately get to the point to say, well, the whole point of the internet is it's all supposed to work together and talk to each other, right? And what Ken was saying earlier, when you have a gazillion connections, that's supposed to be what's happening, right? That's why the internet's so valuable. So the idea of build a new internet that's more secure, technically, it generally always ends up by saying, yeah, nobody can communicate with each other, right? That's how we're going to secure it. So that doesn't work out at the end of the day, right? So things have to change about just accept it. The internet is what it is, right? And there may be things like IPv6 and certain things that can improve it over time. But you just have to be in on top of that from an architecture perspective of doing things in a totally next generation way on top of that. But you're not going to change the internet. That's my opinion. But.
Yeah, I do think there's some models out there that we're seeing that, at least in my mind, have real promise for how we can do a better we can better architect some of the foundational security that we need. I'll just give you an example. So Apple's iOS and the iTunes model. We see far fewer attacks and malware incidents in that kind of environment than we do in more open environments like we see with Windows and like we see what we classically have seen with Windows and what we see in Android environments and that kind of thing. So the more, if you take that analogy forward, as we connect more devices that are purpose-built where you don't necessarily need to install, a user doesn't get to install whatever they want, the opportunity to build more closed-loop systems will create a more secure ecosystem for those elements that are built in that way. So I think there are some models that are out there. I would offer that as one. I don't think it's going to fix all the legacy. I don't think it's going to fix everything, but I think we can actually start to create secure enclaves in that kind of connected experience world that we're headed towards very rapidly.
Until you jailbreak it.
Nothing's perfect, right? I mean, there's no perfect security in a physical world or virtual, but I do think there's some models we could look to that make some sense.
So like gated communities, but all on the same highway or something.
Well, possibly.
I think we all, as companies, have a broad range of technologies that even to protect what exists with the fragmented architectures that are out there, do a pretty good job of protecting folks. So we're working to make sure that even with what you have, it can be protected if you take time to understand. I think another element is the human element. So we're all technology companies. That's what we sell and we do. But a lot of the vulnerabilities that we create are because there's not awareness that we need to behave differently because people are trying to get at our personal information. When we review what's happening at Symantec every month to protect Symantec's environment, and I'm guessing my competitors are no different, about half of the potential incidents really are vulnerabilities we introduce because people are not that aware of the spear phishing that's going on, the email that comes to my admin, the email that comes to the CFO saying, please transfer $10 million into this bank account, all those silly things. Please look at these pictures, of this celebrity. People are pretty clever in terms of how they're engineering these attacks. So we are introducing a lot of those vulnerabilities by our behavior. So the technology can only go so far if we're not educating ourselves to this is happening, it's pervasive, and we should expect these kind of attacks in our email every day.
Yeah, and also I see today's internet still, even 50 years, they're still using the same IP address or protocol, even IPv4, IPv6 now. There's no basic change. It's just like all the routing, all the switching, still just connect people. They never look at what's the user behind, what's the content, what's the application. So that's making the traditional security quite vulnerable because they only look at the connection. That's the traditional firewall. They only look at who can connect in, who cannot. But nowadays, there's so many ways you can bypass that internet connection, bypass the firewall. Whether the mobile device, there's all like compromise, there's all kind of things you can bypass the traditional internet connect, get inside the company. So because inside the company, you can see it's still all layer 2, layer 3 connection, whether the switching or some other device there, they just connect all the people they're supposed to be trusted. That's where internet originally designed for. It's all trust party connect together. Now it's become a global sense. And there's so many other application flow on the internet, which has a lot of value involved. So that's attract a lot of bad guys and see, hey, how I can extract all the value from there. So, but somehow the architecture now addresses this issue. I think with the right architecture, they can reduce the threat there. But probably, like Mike also said, is really you need to have both the infrastructure and also you need to have some technology and also educated people behind to using it to address the issue.
No, totally. We had Admiral Rogers from NSA at our tech conference last week, and he said, seriously, he's thinking of revoke clearances for people who click on phishing emails. Because it was one of the big breaches was because some lieutenant clicked on something. He's like, you actually clicked on this? He's like, why are we letting you on darknet? But all right, Ken, you mentioned this, and Michael, you said this in your first response. Like, this would be a lot worse if there weren't companies such as yourselves doing these things. We're here in Silicon Valley. A lot of companies starting up now they're trying to start security companies. Or they're running companies that are going to have to interact with security vendors. And the hard part with the security industry is you're proving your value by proving something didn't happen. And I guess if you're talking to a young entrepreneur in this space, like how do you go about proving you add value? Because there's such a reputation for snake oil in this industry because it is so buzzy right now.
Well, I think you're able to demonstrate things that you're catching. I mean, the industry's for years been able to demonstrate if attacks come in, how much you're catching. Now, we're constantly trying to improve that, but I don't think you just have to take it on faith that there's nothing bad happening and these products don't work. It's quite the opposite. You can show with this attack, this technique will stop that. I think the problem with the startups, from my standpoint, is there's a lot of clever ideas out there. Many of them are trying to attack a single point problem, or there's a new technique. And the thought that as companies or as individuals, we're going to be able to integrate hundreds of different technologies in running a company or as an individual is nonsense. So what we're hearing from a lot of customers is enough already. Thank you for the clever new ideas, but we've got to work with some vendors who can provide us at least a baseline of protection, and then we might pick 1 or 2 or 3 of these to integrate, but we can't be an integrator of 50 to 100 different technologies, so we've got latest techniques to solve all these point problems.
Yeah, and also like Mark and Mike said, right now the offense cost is much lower than the defense cost. And there's so many ways you can attack. And there's so many applications and so many devices you try to protect. And then when you try to defend, try to make secure, you try to secure all of them. It's pretty much all impossible. That's making the defense cost starting get pretty high. And also the traditional way, whether you have a trust zone and trust zone starting broken. So you really need to go back to see, hey, what's my most important data, information, IP I can protect. That's where go to the server, go to the data source, and also try to segregate inside the company and also like isolate the most important data you will have. So that get more important because traditionally, whether the trust zone or DMZ or parameter defense starting breaking out right now.
I think some of that complexity you see in our business as well, it mirrors our customers. The customer, one of the biggest enemies of our customers are their own organizational structure. And we've talked now a little bit about how the internet's evolved very quickly, the technology architectures have evolved very quickly. If you think about it, most IT organizations kind of run the way they've been run for years and years and years and years. Yet the attackers have changed their methodologies like 1,000 times, a week since that point in time. So, if you're still, I got a network security group, I got an endpoint group, and everybody's kind of doing their own thing and operating IT the way they did 15 years ago, there's no wonder that the effectiveness level against the attacker who's unbounded by cost, they're not going to get arrested because no one's really doing anything about it from a law enforcement perspective. I mean, they're operating with immunity, and organizations aren't really designed well to actually combat the problem. Now, I do think some mindsets are starting to shift. I do see some organizations starting to think differently about how they run their cybersecurity programs. But, in a lot of ways, the structural challenges that many, many organizations face, the government's a fantastic example of this problem, right? Their structure is inherently causing them to fail. And they've got to rethink how they do security if they're going to be successful. It's not just a technology problem. It's absolutely a structural people problem.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
And back to that mathing, I think one answer to your question is, can you demonstrate, if you're one of these companies, leverage in the math problem, right? Because that's what we have to have. We have to have leverage here, right? And so if you're a company and you come along and say, here's the thing like Mike said, I did this, one thing to find the next thing. If the outcome of that for companies is say, here's another thing to buy, to put into the networks we all described, which were legacy in nature and are very complex already, you don't have a great future, right? Because the complexity is the enemy of security, right? So what has to happen is it has to get more elegant. I mean that in a technical term, right? It has to be simpler. Simplicity is the friend of security, right? So to get leverage over this, whatever that thing is, and you're seeing this play out in our industry today, that things that for a very long time were these, here you need this, and you need this, and you need this, and you need this, they're being subsumed in the platforms, like Mike said. And because that's the only way you can get leverage over this. But if your pitch is going to be buy this thing from me so that you as a customer can put one more thing in your network, from a security perspective, you probably don't have a bright future.
Yeah, one of the things to pick up on what Mark is saying that I think we're all doing from a technology perspective is trying to get smarter to make sure that the products can talk to each other to help overcome the problem Chris talked about where the organizations don't. So how can we make what we do simpler for the folks in our security organizations who are monitoring the security environment? If the products can talk to each other, if they can correlate what they're seeing, they can be a lot more effective. And that's a trend you're starting to see a lot more in our industry.
Chris, I want to drill down on something you said there. You said a lot of organizations, they're reorganizing so they can more efficiently deal with these problems. And I'd like to give people a better picture. So what does that look like, especially if you're not a ginormous company?
So I sat down with a CISO for one of the names that got mentioned earlier in your opening. And he kind of came in after the fact, which, as many CISOs, like most of the CISOs of those companies are new now, obviously. So he came in after the fact, and he's instituted in an entirely different way of operating a security program. Because what he told me is like, hey, when I came in, security was distributed all throughout the different parts of the IT group. There were some kind of cybersecurity people, under the CISO, but they were constantly sort of in turf wars with different parts of the IT organization. And the other thing he said look, we're not going to try to run the security infrastructure, but what we are going to do is we're going to create a whole new series of metrics. Things like how do we get median time to detection, median time to response. We're going to run like exercises every day so that when we know that threats are getting into our environment, we're going to measure ourselves on how fast we can detect those threats and actually respond to them. And we're going to build like Pareto charts and actually understand how far down that curve we can go before we need to sort of rethink our approach. And like that's a completely different way of thinking about your security program than, okay, let me go buy a firewall, let me go buy antivirus, let me go buy this, plug those things in, hope that they work, and if they don't, then I get fired and somebody else gets the job.
And actually, and anyone can chime in here, do you think it's fair after there's a big breach, should the CISO get fired?
I think it's complicated, right? Because I do.
I don't presume to know the answer.
I don't know. Fair, in business, hard to say, right? I think it is complicated, though, because, after a breach, to some degree, if the people who know the most about your organization basically have no incentive to stay or they get fired or whatever, you may be in a elongated period of cleaning up after that breach. So I think that's a very interesting question from a managerial perspective is how do you hold people accountable, but also how do you make sure you can get your business back up and running quickly, without basically disincentivizing everybody in the security organization to go look for a new job. And by the way, they can get one tomorrow because there's so few people in this industry, they can get a new job tomorrow, even if they were in an organization that was the victim of a breach.
And we will come back to that. But Mike, you laughed at that question. What do you think?
I think Chris is spot on. I mean, the truth is, if there's a very sophisticated attacker, let's say it's state-sponsored, and they want to get into a company, much less a government, and we've already seen how our government's been breached multiple times, I think it's pretty hard to defend against that. So I'd find it very hard to hold the CISO accountable and say, we were breached, you're fired. I think a lot of times boards, CEOs, are not very sophisticated in terms of the kind of metrics that they should be following to really assess the question, are we safe? The question get asked, are we safe? Could we be breached? Well, in some ways, that's kind of nonsense. I just said, if the attacker is motivated enough and you have it sophisticated enough, they're going to get in. What kind of things should you be following? Chris was talking about that. How many endpoints are infected? What is our mean time to remediate a situation? We should have a series of metrics that we're following to make sure that our organizations are as safe as they can be. How well are we protected? As we put those in place, we're going to have a lot better sense of, was the person not doing their job and should be fired, or this was a situation that had been very difficult to protect against.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I saw a statistic recently that until last year, about a year ago, the shortest tenured job in a public company in the United States was the CEO. And now it's the chief security officer. Happy to change places, right?
Sometimes they go out together, right?
Well, I think that's my point. What's changed in all this is, whether the CISO is getting fired, was the CEO getting fired, right? Because if the CEO is getting fired, the CISO is definitely getting fired. Right? So
coming with me.
Exactly, yeah. So that's a big shift.
And Ken, any other thoughts on that?
I have to say some of the breach happened in all this well-known case. Their security level actually above average. But what they got is really the spotlight effect. And once it's in the news, then they look at all the detail because I have to say, a lot of time, even they are already pretty secure, but like Mike said, there's no 100% guarantee. And also a lot of time they just get too much information and a false alarm, whatever they cannot handle. Like the biggest retail happened like 2 years ago. It's really, they just get so many alarm information, and it's all breach happen, whatever, like few hundred a day. So they cannot deal with it anymore. So that's actually, you need to have some help on the technology, not only detection, but also find a way to prevent it happen. Mm-hmm. And whether you can like automatically prevent things, or that's where in security I usually see there's a few stages. Like the new technology, always first stage, whether the intrusion or the sandbox or all this kind of ATP, the first stage always the detection. And then the second stage is really you can reduce false positive, then become the prevention, become an inline device, so take some action. And then the third stage is become the integration. You need to integrate with other systems, whether the firewall, whatever you can call UTM or next-gen firewall. That's become the intrusion technology integrate with the firewall, become a whole system there. And then eventually you also need to reduce the cost, because the security is always a trade-off, how much risk you want to take and what's the cost. So if you can do a security without cost a lot, without compromise your productivity, then that's better, more effective than the most costly is really you have the air gap. You never connect things together, then you lost all the productivity. And then eventually is really how you can fit in all the infrastructure, because today's network is starting to get faster and faster. So security is still much more computing intensive, much slower compared to a lot of applications. So that's making security become a burden for a lot of companies, whether the cost or kind of reduce the productivity or a lot of human involved. So that's what we're trying to see how to find the balance point with your cost, productivity, the risk you're willing to take. So that's the challenge for a lot of IT guys.
Mm-hmm. Now, Ken and Mike, when we were talking about this, you guys both mentioned, what some call nation-state hacking, and this isn't the kid in the basement. This is, the Chinese army. This is Iran, who, pick your bad guy from a James Bond movie.
Both of those.
To what extent, if I'm a company, does it matter who did it or who's trying to do it? There's sort of a debate in the security industry right now, like, well, you should just lock your stuff down and not be getting obsessed over, who this is. And some people say it really helps you if you know who's going after you. And I'd like to actually do a poll of the panel here.
It matters. It matters. The who is often associated with the why, and the why is going to tell you what they're looking for. So you can go through the questions, right, and you say, it matters. Now, at the end of the day, Ken actually described an interesting maturity model for the defensive component of this. If you don't have all those things right, like the who doesn't really matter that much, to some degree. So your level of sophistication sort of dictates, I think, whether you really care about the who. But I do know a lot of, I challenge that with a lot of customers, and so I've debated this a bunch of different times. And I used to say, well, yeah, why do you care about the who? And they say, well, the who dictates what information they might be looking for, or ultimately what aspect of my organization they might be going after. And if you're, let's say you're the CISO for a 300,000 person organization that operates in 90 countries around the world, and you got massive amounts of infrastructure, like the who and the what matters a lot, because you can't just generically defend everything the same way. So having some understanding of who's coming at you, what they might be looking for, their level of motivation, it does matter.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of a different on it, which is I think it does matter that, and I agree with everything Chris said as to why, but what are they after, and then what are the methods, right, that were used, and you can learn from the methods. Right. I do think it's something, though, that the security industry and all the customers took, like, in my opinion, sort of an unfortunate frolic and detour over the last, 3 years in security on this point, and just got so obsessed with this, frankly, because it's like, one, it's intellectually curious. Of course, if you get robbed, you want to know who did. If someone robbed us, be like, who did that? Why would they do that to me, right? And it's like, you got robbed. Don't worry about it. So there's an intellectual curiosity aspect of knowing that, which has some bearing on things that could be better into the future, right? And then the second thing is that's the James Bond part. Right, and everybody loves that stuff. Yeah, right.
Including the media, which plays a big role.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the media ate it up, right? And then I don't know, like I say, for 2 or 3 years, and it's changing. I can see it changing, but the last 2 or 3 years, there's just such an obsession with this. Meanwhile, not taking care of business on other things that we've talked about you have to do, but they just put tons of time and money, and I just think there's way too much attention on that, and you should garner the right things out of that. What are they after, and how do they do it? But move on. Right?
Yeah.
Well, I think the method is important. We learn a lot by studying what attackers do. What's the kill chain? So if we understand that, and it doesn't just apply, it probably applies more to the criminals than it does the nation states. But if you learn how a certain bank is being attacked in one part of the world, the criminals are trying to leverage their own business model, right? The more they can attack using the same technique, the better. That's cheaper. So back to the math problem that Mark talked about originally, they're trying to make the math work on their side. We've got to be smarter about saying, okay, here's the method they're using, and we've got to spread that to all the customers as quickly as possible. Because if they're using that technique for a bank in Australia, it's not going to be 10 minutes later that you're seeing that in the UK or here in the US. So I think the method is critically important in the WHO and how we prevent more attacks from occurring.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I feel there's four kinds of attacker there. Traditionally, we call activists. It's really the one they try to demonstrate, hey, they're very good, they want to make some statement, and they make famous there. So that's still there. And then there's a nation state. And then on the other side, there's also the criminal, like the crypto Wall 3. So they can make a lot of money there behind. And then there's also the terrorist. But right now we see probably a lot of things starting to happen is really the hacker side, they become a business model there. So they can make a lot of money out of there. So that's just like the crypto Wall 3. You can say in about 1 year, they made over 300 million, 325 million out of all this campaign there. So they become business model. The issue is really once they cross the border, you cannot do anything about it. Because the internet is a global sense. But when you do the law enforcement, you can only do local here. So that's making attacking so easy, low cost, not much risk. And defense starting to get more kind of expensive or more difficult right now. Because even you found out the bad guy, you cannot do anything about it. So that's the whole internet structure right now. And if there's a way to really have more cooperation or there's a way to break down the criminal, that's maybe can make the attack cost higher, like Mark said. Because right now, they almost have no cost, no risk behind.
Mm-hmm. So we just, we talked about the very sexy part of security here, the James Bond aspect, the different types of hackers. We're going to talk about something really boring now, but something maybe important. How much of this stuff would be stopped or would be better if people just patch their systems? And I know we're in Silicon Valley, but just, you get that annoying alert, every month or so saying, oh, there's a new version for Word or new iOS, a new Flash. And if people just hit update right away every time, how much of this stuff would stop?
A lot.
Oh, surprising you would say that.
Yeah.
It's hygiene. It's hygiene. There's all sorts of things that you should just do, and that's one of them of patching your system so you're always most up to date because the providers are trying to fix known vulnerabilities all the time, and that's why they're pushing the update, right?
That's where everybody probably knows that that's where that concept of 0 day comes in. What are the vulnerabilities exist, and how do you stop that as soon as possible? And a lot of times a long time exists when these 0 day vulnerabilities occur before there's a patch in the market. And all that time, people are out there taking advantage of those holes.
Uh-huh. Would you guys, especially, being in charge of such a large antivirus engine, could you put a number even on how much of the activity you're seeing is from old bugs that had been fixed long ago?
Well, if you think about the breaches, a lot of the highest profile breaches, where there's publicly available information, or I don't know of a single one that there wasn't actually some vulnerability that was exploited as part of the breach at somewhere in the chain, right? Whether that was an unpatched system, a misconfigured router, a sysadmin credential that was admin 123, or no password whatsoever. So, those are just basic, hygiene, basic hygiene components of running an IT infrastructure that time and time again, a vendor wasn't properly configured. Somebody wasn't running anti-malware on one of their systems. You can tick down the list, but I can go find you that in almost every single major breach that we've seen in the last year and a half.
Mm-hmm. But also, with so many things or devices connected to the internet,
the things get worse and worse because a lot of them designed without security in mind because they have very limited computing power, and also with a very new application OS. So that's where we estimate the IoT, the Internet of Things, is 10 to 100 times less secure than the PC or some other mature OS. Because it's very limited and both the time to prove and secure and also limited computing power, you can do anything about it.
Mm-hmm. Now, with the exception, and if I get bios here wrong, please forgive me. With the exception of Ken, the three of you started in other parts of tech before coming into security, right? Or
True for me.
yeah, more or less. Chris, somewhere in between.
More or less security for me.
Okay, all right. So one of the issues, and Chris, you and I talked about this a little bit beforehand, one of the issues in security right now, there just aren't enough security professionals, whether it's in the government, in the private sector. And I guess for me, what's been the challenge and how do we fix it of getting more people to come into this space?
I think we got to do a couple things. And this is something that even at a national level, we need this to happen. So I think there's a couple things that need to happen. One is the people who are actually going into technical professions. We need to get more of them, interested in security. One of the things that Intel's got a big diversity initiative, and so I was just recently with one of the Girls Who Code groups, and my whole pitch to the 30 women in the room was, you need to think about. I'm glad you code, but I want you thinking about cybersecurity as an element of what you might do in your career. I think that we're going to have to go at this almost at like a programmatic level where the government invests in something like a cyber core, where we're really getting into maybe people coming out of high school, certainly college age. I'm thinking almost similar. You look at the Israeli military. A lot of the best. Many of the best Israeli companies are from men and women who were trained in the military. Many of them never even went to college, right? They just went up through the military. Special Defense Forces have started many of the elite. Mark knows some of them very, very well. Ken, so I think that is an incredible training ground, and certainly the scale of professionals that we need to come into the business is something that is going to require a governmental sort of investment in order for us to really get to where we want to be.
Yeah, or incentive programs along those lines. If you go to, I agree with Chris, you go to Singapore, for example, different system. The Singaporeans, a couple of years ago, they just said, Singapore will be the cybersecurity hub for Asia Pacific, if not the world. And they are on a crash course with exactly the kind of stuff that Chris is talking about with institutes, taking people out of the military, doing it. They intend to produce lots of these professionals. We have a different system, in the United States, right? So I think our ability to do what Chris is talking about has to be from an incentive perspective from governments as well. And then also you can see it happening right now in our college and university systems, right? So there are a lot of universities right now, community colleges, that have stood up cybersecurity courses to get certificates in cybersecurity, to get a degree in cybersecurity. Our military now has a U.S. Cyber Command. So in branches, like you used to go into the infantry or the armor, the field artillery, or aviation, now there's one called cyber. So that it's happening. And I completely agree with Chris. If it doesn't happen at a very fast rate, we'll just be underwater from a manpower perspective and all this. Back to the math problem.
The impact you can see is definitely there. I saw a report today that said there was the impact of cyber crimes, $3 trillion worldwide. So it's a massive problem that certainly justifies some of what Chris and Mark were talking about. And it's a shame to see other countries. India is another one that's got an initiative to train lots more folks in cyber. So it's a shame to see that the U.S. isn't on the forefront of that.
Yeah, also, I think not only I agree all of that are saying we need to have more training working with all the university, high school, but also if you look at right now, the cybersecurity or internet security, even some engineer side, they're not quite like in a system as a lawyer, right? So you have a lawyer, you have a CPA, and that's where, but somehow in the cybersecurity, you don't have that kind of things, right? So that's where somehow it's very difficult to judge who is really good, go through the formal training, and there's some system or standard you can meet. They do have some other, a lot of third party like CISP, some other things, but not quite in the whole education system, like how we train the finance professional. They have all the CPA, all the things, and they have how they train the lawyer. Even the MBA, there's quite some program there, but nothing in the some engineering or even cybersecurity space.
Well, and that gets to another thing I wanted to ask, because we can say we need more people, but I'm obviously not a technical person. That's why I'm on this end of the stage. Is security just like a harder part of tech than, say, I want to make the next Instagram or the next, app?
Security changing very quick, just like a lot of computer or whatever. That's where after you go through the college 4 years, half the things you learned is no longer useful. So security is similar things, right? So every year there's so many things changing there. But on the other side, it's a lot of traditional things still apply. So a lot of basic methodology is still useful. But once they have a better system, I feel more people will be getting here, get trained, and reach a certain level. Otherwise, right now it's very difficult to judge. Like Mike said in the early days, really in the healthcare industry, in some other things, a little bit also in the security space, really, there's so many hype going on right now. I have to say, you can see 1,000 startups happen in the over 1,000 in the last 2 years. And every company, they just try to promote, hey, we have the best product, most secure product. So how to judge that is very difficult for a lot of IT buyers because they have very hard time to test themselves. What is secure, what is not secure, and how good for all these things working together. That's where, if there's a way to really validate whether some third party, in the healthcare industry, there's a FDA, they do certain testing, certain things. I'm not sure the security should go to the government, but at least some other validation or whether you can judge in the product or the people, that will help in the whole industry.
Okay. As was said in the introduction, you guys are all part of an organization where you're sharing information on the types of bad things you're seeing out there. The U.S. Senate passed this week a bill that would sort of allow people across the country and various industries to do things like this. It is colloquially referred to as CISA. What do you guys think of this? I mean, this is the first time we've had a high-profile bill like this that could actually become law.
I think there's back to getting to leverage all this, 3 things have to happen. One we talked quite a bit about, which is from a technology perspective, technology has to change into next generation capabilities. Mm-hmm. Talked about that. The second one we just talked about for a while was called the personal cyber hygiene. Mm-hmm. Train people not to do things that should obviously not do and protect themselves and data. And this is the third one to get leverage. So it's technology, training, and then the third is sharing. Right? And we have to create an environment that is one where that from an automated perspective, we can actually share threat intelligence information in a highly automated fashion. And as faster that can occur, without violating privacy issues, right?
And we're going to get
faster that can occur, the more leverage will be put into this situation, because then it's not just your company versus the bad guys, and I'm doing my own thing versus the bad guys, and it's leveraging all of these networks in a way that we can really move the ball down the field. So, from a legislative perspective, there has to be certain things that occur there. Mm-hmm. Some have occurred. It is not an antitrust violation in the United States today by fiat.
That was the DOJ guidance.
Like about 18 months ago. For sharing to occur, that's de facto not an antitrust violation. That may sound like a little thing, but that's good to do, right? Okay. So now there's other things as well as to what are the liability protections. You don't want to immunize negligence here or trample on privacy rights, but getting that balance rate is going to be very important because until there's certainty around that, some legal certainty around that, the ability to do that highly automated sharing is just not going to happen, because people are not going to potentially cross a line that they're going to be have a problem for. So it's important.
I mean, in some ways, that's why we're all here today. What brought us all is the formation of the Cyber Threat Alliance. We're an experiment, really, of can competitors start to share more information, and can we create a safer outcome as a result? And we've got our first proof of that with what Ken referred to earlier as crypto wallet. I don't know how many people are familiar with that, but it's a type of ransomware. The bad guys basically encrypt the data on your machine and say, unless you pay $500, your data's lost. So we as a group went after, can we share information together and catch some group of these criminals in the act? So this is an experiment, the Cyber Threat Alliance. Can we share? Can we do more good by working together, which is what Mark just said.
Yeah, to some degree, the voluntary aspect of what we're doing allows us to be more nimble. Uh-huh. CISA's been in the works for years.
Some
right?
have called it the zombie bill.
Yeah, so that speed is like you've kind of heard that I think probably a lot of times now tonight. Speed is of the essence in this situation. That's why I like more voluntary, collaboration like what we're doing. But we also, like as we've spent time together, we've said let's get targeted and focused on some areas where we think we can make a difference. That's why we went after ransomware as a category, and it did produce the results, or even better, I think, than we might have thought going into it. And so I think we're a good example of ways in which if we collaborate around certain problems, we can get some results that are unique, but also allow us to contribute in different ways, given that we have slightly different aims as different companies.
And because each of our company cover a little bit different area, there's some overlap, but it's really working together and share information, right? Really helping to have a better protection. And like when we started this alliance a little bit over 1 year ago, we say, hey, maybe let's share 1,000 malware sample every day. And later we found, hey, that's probably not enough, and how we can do a better job. And that's where we identified this ransomware a few months ago. Let's say, hey, let's try to target, let's try to see how we can bring down some of the big criminalware behind. And that's the result of working together, share some information so we can identify the whole system behind. And so there's like 800, they call the C2, the command and control website. And there's also even in the first month, we will be able to prevent there's a few 100 million attempt to get in there. So there's a lot of since after we share, we see the whole picture better. So that's making the defense more effective.
I got a couple more questions, and then I want to throw it open to you folks. So start thinking about those, and I think there'll be mics coming around. But Chris and Mark, you guys talked about you guys are doing some of this information sharing voluntarily anyway. Then I guess why would legislation like this be needed? Like, what does it make easier?
Primarily liability,
Yeah.
right? If you get it right? It's a liability protection to say if you're sharing things and you've done it in accordance with the legislation and with now malfeasance or attempts to do anything that's nefarious along those lines, so everything's above board, then can you be protected for any outcomes that would occur? Like if something were untoward to happen, if you have wide open liability for that occurring, you're less likely to want to share, right? So again, like I said, you can't, you don't want to immunize negligence. So, but if you cross that bar, right, then hopefully you can get some kind of liability protection for sharing, so that you're encouraged to do that, or at least not discouraged, from doing it.
And you mentioned the privacy concerns. So, folks, for those who haven't been following every step of Washington minutia, some have been concerned that when security companies such as yourselves are allowed to share information about threats they're seeing with the government, this exposes consumers to various privacy violations, or what some would call privacy violations. This gets thrown around a lot with this bill, and I'd be curious for your guys' take. Like, is this something we should be worried about?
Yes.
Okay.
I agree. Completely agree. Yeah.
And so, what in the bill needs to change then for that not to be?
Well, my understanding is, without being intimate in all the minutiae as you described, that the way this bill works is when we share with the government, and it starts with the Department of Homeland Security, then they do a broad sharing with everyone, including the NSA.
Yeah.
So the question is that the right way it should be shared? What protections should there be for personal information that gets shared with broadly across the government?
So as it stands now, would you be comfortable sharing with the government some of this data?
Well,
we don't have to, right?
We do share, and I'm sure we all share some information with the government, but when we do share, we make sure that personally identifiable information is not part of that. And typically you don't need to share that kind of information to stop the attackers, to share information about what methods attackers are using, and so forth. So I think we just, as a society, want to be clear that how this information can be shared, what can be shared, and what protections there are.
I think sharing this intelligence information definitely is good, but I feel that's also not quite enough, because there's just too much information, And a lot of IT security guys, they just get so much information, they have a difficult time to see, hey, what's the true, what's the false, all these kind of things. I feel if there's a way to help them, just like in the healthcare industry, there's some system can help them make a better decision, whether judging the information or the product will be much better, because today there's just so many information and false alarm happening in the space. Even from the vendor side, we see a lot of some company, whether startup, something, they also marketing a lot, right? So that's making sometimes IT guys starting to get confused because for them, they're very difficult to do the testing themselves because security is too complicated, whether in the technical level or they don't have the resource. So that's where if there's something beyond sharing, getting information, also can help them make their decision, just like happened in the healthcare industry, so they can help them make some better judgment, making the difficulty of making decision lower. Because right now, for the individual or the whether in the IT industry, IT professional or the consumer, pretty much impossible for them to making some judgment testing themselves. So they really need to depend on whether the third party or government, just like they happen in the healthcare industry, the FDA, to help them in the next level, how they can make things better.
Can I add one
please.
thing? So I think that we aren't going to know all these. We're not going to know where we're going to potentially intrude on privacy, a priori. Like I think what my recommendation on the bill to the government would be, look, you need to create a framework where we can actually do some experimentation, like we're doing with CTA, so we can kind of learn as we go. I mean, the attack landscape is moving so quickly. How can we possibly take a monolithic approach, like legislation coming out of Congress, and expect that we're going to be able to be as nimble as our adversary? We have to rethink the construct, because here we go again. Like, let's apply the way we've been doing things for like 300 years to a problem that's changing every minute. It's not going to work. And I applaud the intent, but the structure is going to be its downfall if we just kind of do it the way we've always done it.
Are you suggesting Washington is being clunky and slow-footed? There's your headline right there.
Well, we certainly hope Washington stays focused on catching the bad guys. That's clearly one of government's roles. Right. Yeah. So we're all supportive of that.
All right. I think we have time for one more, and this is sort of a broad question about the change in tech. You guys have all been in the technology space for quite a while. In that time, we've seen enterprise tech go from, you have a bunch of servers in the back room, and you keep all your stuff there. So now, even the Wall Street Journal, we are now switching to email from a company that rhymes with Google. I don't know why I can't say Google. So anyway, is this making us safer? The idea that we are sort of, outsourcing, email is no longer an Outlook server in the back. We use Slack, you use Gmail, you use AWS, you use Dropbox. Does this make our corporate data safer, or is that a risk?
No, it doesn't make it safer. Estimates are that as people move to the cloud, you expand the attack surface by 4 to 10 times. So all of the things that we love about technology that improve our own productivity come with security risks. So as already been mentioned, a lot of these things are not designed with security in mind. So if companies providing cloud-based services do think about security and provide that, then you can be safer. But without really thinking about that proactively, you're not safer.
I think you got to know safer than what, right? I mean, that's the hard part. Is like, what's the baseline? I mean, Mike opened up and said, like the question you asked is kind of like asking, why do people get sick? Like, to some degree, you need to understand the baseline to be able to say this is safer than that, because it depends on the business. It depends on what's in that email system. It depends on what email system you're comparing it against. I think it has potential to be safer in some use cases. I think that's absolutely true. I think in other ones, as Mike pointed out, you open up the attack surface because of ways in which you're doing things differently. I think what's more fundamental about the cloud, if you're an organization, an enterprise, what's more fundamental from a security perspective about the cloud is that you're now outsourcing your security to somebody else with very little ability to actually say anything or do anything about it if something goes wrong. So that's the question. That's probably your first question you got to ask yourself is, well, how do I manage because I'm still responsible, but now I've given over, the control to somebody else. And I think that's a more fundamental question than whether I'm safer or not.
And I guess, and you raise a good point, Chris, that question was kind of vague. When you're dealing with clients and they're saying, oh, we're no longer storing that, we're now going to use cloud provider X, do you generally find those providers are taking their customer security seriously? Do you trust those providers?
I think, well, see, and they're different, right?
Yeah.
So is it a platform provider? Because a platform provider is kind of like, it's kind of like buying a server, right? If you want to layer in all the security technologies and bring your own policies, it's pretty much an open environment, and it's up to you to construct your security controls if you go into most kind of hosting or cloud platform providers. If you go into a SaaS provider, then they do theoretically bring some security controls, but then you're back into that world where you've effectively now outsourced the responsibility to somebody else. So SaaS, versus public cloud, private. And so cloud is sort of, unfortunately, it's like it means different things depending upon how you're consuming the technology, how it's deployed, what you're actually buying. So that's the challenge. It's a pretty complex issue, and I think you should start with those bigger questions first if you're thinking about moving to more from a traditional environment to the cloud.
Here's the use case that I'm worried about, that I hear many of our customers worried about, is great, you've moved your email to the cloud, or you've moved maybe Salesforce or other even more sensitive information to the cloud, even more than your email. And now you have employees who are using that at Starbucks over Wi-Fi, and they're downloading information to their own personal device and taking that away, and then you have a lot bigger security risk, certainly, than what you had protecting a corporate network. You basically lost control of what applications they were using, what data. Now, we have technologies that can protect you in that vulnerable situation, but it's not the same technologies that you'd use to protect a corporate network.
I feel it's really a case-by-case analysis. It's always a balance point, because if you see when data move to the cloud, compared you can log in your server room, if you handle the same way for security, it definitely will be less secure. But if there's some cloud provider, they're much more professional, or they have a bigger skill, whatever, more protection, that can make it a little bit secure. So that's always how the balance point among handle something with some big skill, whatever, more complicated solution, compared to you handle something yourself. It's really the balance among how much skill you have, the resource level, and also ease of use. I also agree with Mike, really, when you move a lot of things into the mobile device, that also makes things much less secure compared to the traditional way you handle that. But then you also need to work in with the carrier, some other service provider, try to make the pipe a little bit more clean. We call it clean pipe. So there's a different way to address the issue. It's really more case by case. It's very difficult to say move to the cloud will be more secure, or you keep in your own enterprise will be more secure. It's the cost issue, the skill issue, and also what you compromise if you move some things there.
We are going, are the microphones out? I'm just going to open this up to, we got one in the back there. And guys, thank you so much. And
thank you.
I'm sure we'll. Next question.
So my name is Dominique Trampont. When I listen to you, I have a vocabulary question. You seem to be very focused on intrusion protection. What about extrusion protection? I'm on the board of a small company, a clean tech company that is very successful, and we found a Chinese truck in the parking lot trying to suck our R&D data, and we were scrambling to figure out how to detect that they took anything. So that's kind of question number one. Question number two in the vocabulary section is that you talk a lot about defense and my question is, what about offense? Why don't we destroy the destroyers? And it's a bit of an informed question because I know actually of a company in Israel who tried to do that by former Mossad agents. And they existed, I think, for 3 or 4 days. And the Russian mafia threatened them to say, "We know where your kids are going to school. We know where your grandmother is, and we are gonna take them down if you don't shut down the company." The company was shut down. But I'm kind of wondering at the industry level if we don't have weaponry that we could deploy against the hackers.
Well, I want to take the easy part of the question, which is the exfiltration of key data. Frankly, there are technologies that what we call help you make sure the good stuff stays in. So we all produce technologies that keep bad guys out. But what about the most critical data? If you're a software company, it's a source code. But maybe it's your credit card information if you're a retailer and so forth. So the technology exists. It's called data loss prevention, that you can apply some policies to make sure some data never leaves, can't be accessed, who can access it, what are the conditions. So that technology exists.
I'll jump on the, I used to work for Dominique. He taught me many of the things I know, so thank you. I think on the offensive side, I personally think it's a very bad idea. And the reason for that is not that the capabilities don't exist, but that if you just think about how easy it is for an attacker to fool folks today about where an attack's coming from in the first place, now imagine that private companies were on the offense, right? And how easy it would be to be attacking the wrong thing, right? And so now we talked a little bit about liability before, just in sharing information. Imagine that situation where you get it wrong, and I think I was attacked by, by Chinese, and I take Mike down as a result because they just redirected that attack or somehow, right? Oops, sorry about that. I was really, it would just be such the Wild West situation. I do believe that there's absolutely a role to play from a government perspective.
Isn't it illegal also?
Well, it is. I'm just saying so, but the question is...
A minor point.
That's not the important.
But from a government perspective, we do play offense today. I think pretty well, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's a role for them to play, and there's a place for that. But from a commercial, private industry perspective, I just think that would be a Wild West situation. Probably wouldn't end very well. But. Yeah, I'm not saying it shouldn't occur. I think the proper place is not like that company. And I heard that story too, but not like the company in Israel. But if we all started to play offense, it'd be pretty messy, pretty fast.
I think this is more because internet really connect globally together, and then once you try to enforce certain law cross border, it's almost impossible. And that's where we found hackers sometimes even they want to attack their next door, they just go overseas and then come back in, which you cannot trace them anymore. So that's where the problem is the current internet architecture, really, they only address the connection. They never address what's in the user, what's in the application, what's in the content. I think to solve this issue, eventually you need to work in with whether the legal system or the different nation, whatever, just like in the environment issue, just like a nuclear issue. So there have to be some cooperation to address the issue. Otherwise, you can hide behind. There's always famous already, when you connect internet, you never know what's behind there, whether it's a dog or whatever things connect with you. So that's the problem with today's internet architecture. And on the other side, whether you want offense or not, I think from our side we say, hey, let's just do the best defense. We say defense is already very, very difficult compared to offense. And that's where you need to defense millions ways they want to attack you. Offense is much more easy, but to do the best defense, we have to work in together. So that's the reason we try to share information, cooperate, and we try to bring down this ransomware because defense is much, much more difficult, much high cost compared to offense.
Here's one thing I will say, though. An organization can go more on offense inside its own entity. So one thing that, if you think about it, a lot of times in a cybersecurity paradigm, the defenders actually kind of wait for something to happen. Then they a piece of malware comes in. They either try to block it or they try to fix it, clean it. But they wait for an alert to happen before they do anything. One thing that I'm starting to hear more and more, and I think this is actually a really good methodology, the most proactive security organizations are saying, I'm going to let my security apparatus deal with the 99% of threats I care about. I'm going to go literally hunting in my environment for the threats that might not actually be active. They could be dormant. They could be periodically active. But I'm going to proactively go out and find those threats and not wait for an alert to come through my, my IPS or my firewall or my SIM tool before I start looking for that threat. So I do think there's an element of offensive or maybe sort of a proactive defense that I think a lot of organizations can use. And I think that's the people who are out on the cutting edge right now, that's the kind of thing they're doing.
So to build on Chris's point, it's estimated that 70% of the attacks are unknown. So you don't know that an attack is occurring. And the average attack is over 200 days. So imagine that attacker's in your environment, to Chris's point, almost a year, you don't even know it. So if we don't get more proactive and go hunting for these things, more bad things will happen.
Next question.
Larry Magid with CBS News. I wonder if you guys could comment about the tension between law enforcement / government and the world of security and privacy. For example, a lot of people in your industry recommend strong encryption, but we had the FBI director recently question whether encryption was interfering with our ability to protect national security, to investigate crimes, et cetera. So this is, I know, always an ongoing debate, but I'm just curious, where you guys feel about this.
I'll go Larry first. I think if historically the concepts of security and privacy, first of all, this is not a new debate. Let's start with that, right? And historically, and I mean for a long time, right, they've been in tension with each other, and they move depending on what's happening, where we are in the history as a country, into sometimes more heavy on the security side, sometimes more heavy on the privacy side, and always attempting to find the perfect balance between the two. And it's very rare that would occur, right? But the important point of that is security and privacy. And a lot of times that debate, depending on where we are historically, gets security or privacy, right? And my opinion is that it has to be an and in there, not an or.
I'm arguing that there's tension between security and privacy versus law enforcement. I'm putting security and privacy in the same bucket because encryption, for example, gives you both security and privacy. Yet there are those in law enforcement who feel that it's a threat to national security, which I guess is different than other kinds of security.
Yeah, and I understand. What I'm saying is that from a historical perspective, technologies change over time, but the tension between that situation is not the first time it's ever occurred, right? The technology we're talking about now is encryption, called, can you encrypt everything, and if so, is there a way to break it? And if there's not a way to break it, should there be backdoors in it, right, so that law enforcement can do that? And that's the debate that's happening right now, and there's an obvious tension. Both sides have a really good point, right, about privacy, and the law enforcement side has a really good point about, hey, what if we can't get to the bad guy, right, because we can't read this stuff? And that has to get sorted out. Exactly how that's going to occur, I'm not really sure, but both sides have their back up pretty high on this. And until dialogue is occurring and starting to occur now, I think it'll get worked out over time, because historically it always has. Right? What we have here is a new technical aspect called, for the time being, unbreakable encryption. Right?
I think it's the privacy and the government. That's the lawyer's question. So you answered quite well. For the encryption. That's the technology not only used to protect, but also you see the Crypto War 3, they also use the technology to encrypt your data, asking for money. So it depends on who is using the technology to do what. You can protect your own data, but if some bad guy got your data encrypted, that's also a big trouble there.
Next question.
1 million by 1 million. On the 1 million by 1 million blog, we run several major thought leadership series, and one of them is Thought Leaders in Cybersecurity. Another one is Thought Leaders in Internet of Things. Now, we have a lot of conversations that are pointing to the fact that one of the reasons Internet of Things is not moving very fast is because cybersecurity is a threat. So a lot of CEOs, especially more and more now because of the breaches that are happening, are afraid that the more they increase the surface area, that opens up risks for threat, risks for security breaches, are going to hinder Internet of Things. What's your perspective? What are you seeing? How do we get past this obstacle?
I don't see Internet of Things moving slow. I'm not really sure about that. We're connecting more devices, experiences than we ever had. I mean, the pace of change in technology is moving.
I'll give you a clear example of where Internet of Things is moving slow. It's in retail.
In retail?
Yes.
So if you think about it, now you pretty much every retail experience, mobile devices, smart mirrors, you can literally people walking around stores. I'm not sure that it's moving slow. We could debate whether things are moving quickly or moving slowly. I'm talking to customers every day. If you think about it, like the Internet of Things is actually happening, and a lot of us don't even know it. Think about it this way. We used to think about computing. Now we compute without thinking. It's happening all the time. So like most of the cars we drive, one of the reasons everybody was so like up in arms about the Jeep hack that was in Wired magazine was that like most people don't even really realize that their car today is as much a computing device as it is a transportation device. So I actually think the Internet of Things is happening, and the security problem is actually kind of trying to run like we're trying to run behind it to catch up. Now, that being said, in my mind, one of the more profound aspects of connected devices or experiences is the crossover point for physical security implications, right? Where we used to just worry about data breaches, and now we should be thinking about, hey, I'm driving now. I'm going to get in my car now and drive out of here at 70 miles per hour down the highway, maybe faster if I don't think there are any cops around. And if somebody were to actually attack my vehicle, they could kill me. That's a very real risk that we're starting to face because of connected. And you could apply that to the power grid. You could apply it to most industrial systems, all of which are being connected, many of which are unpatched systems. So I think that's going to be a profound risk, but I don't feel like it's really holding anybody back that much. I think it's happening very quickly. One good example is like our Internet of Things business at Intel is growing double digits, right? It's like one of the fastest growing parts of our company. This is happening. I think it's a big issue. We need to spend time on it. We've actually put some initiatives in place ourselves. We actually crafted an automotive security review board. We're actually pouring a lot of resource into looking at how we can actually help with this problem because the security models haven't kept up with a lot of the devices that we're starting to connect.
It certainly complicates things. We talked about networks disappearing into the cloud. So when SaaS computing came along, applications left the network. Then mobility came along, and the users left the network. And then cloud came along, and the network left the network, right? And now we're going to have 500 billion more things connected. So it certainly complicates it. But I think kind of what Chris is saying is, as that occurs, at whatever pace it occurs, it's about the data. Like, from a security perspective, how much intensity do you want to put from security on the data, right? So if the Chinese know that I'm out of milk because my refrigerator told me that, they can have that, right? But if they're gonna, if my car's at risk, not really care about that. So I think it'll be a data-driven as to how much intensity of security will matter in certain areas of IoT, and then there'll be requirements on that for automobiles, for example, and SCADA systems and airlines and things along those lines. Probably not for Fitbit, right? But you have to go on a case-by-case basis.
It's just very early on. It's not even the first inning of Internet of Things. So it's an incredible opportunity, and I think we are behind as an industry, but we're going to catch up quickly because the threats are going to be there. That's what's being written about. That makes people's awareness higher, and we're going to be jumping all over that.
Because when you connect these together, people feel, hey, that's increase the productivity. Just like you mentioned retail, you can see how Amazon, how some other eBay, all this business starting to get more productive. But on the other side, the trade-off is always when you become more productive, then what's the other you sacrifice, you compromise. And we can all go back to the paper stage. We can, even today's military network still physically air-gapped. That's no physical connection. So that's making things not more productive. But on the other side, you get a traditional security there. So that's always a trade-off. I kind of agree. When you get connection into a certain level, you need to consider what's the improvement of the productivity compared to what's the other cost may come up. So that's where always you try to whether have a better system design or have some people more trained to handle this. Because I have to say, today's internet and also today's networking, whether routing switching, is only about connection. So if there's a way they can identify the user, they can identify the application, identify the content, especially inside the company. And that's what makes things better and making the improvement go to the next stage. Because today, you do have supposed to be like 40, 50 years ago, internet, you have a trust party, connect together over internet. But once you connect all the other things, car, whatever, all together, and especially when you do the global connection, you may have a business model, much bigger, better, whatever. But on the other side, it's a lot of data. Right now, you're just connecting together, no longer enough. You need to see the content application, the user behind.
All right. Next question, and we got time for one more after that.
Hi, guys. My name's Will Glazier. I just have a quick follow-up back to that CISA bill, your favorite topic, I'm sure. How are you going to prevent information sharing from becoming a one-way street, sort of from you guys into the government? And do you intend to use your leverage as some of the industry leaders to actually get info back, to help you do your jobs?
I think, I would say I think it's actually, in most cases when I'm speaking to various government leaders, there's a desire for it to be a two-way street. And there's progress, and it's slow and clunky, or whatever the right words were right earlier, but on this. In the last 12, 18 months or so, the administration set up something called the CTIC, which was the mechanism by which government organizations would share with themselves. Start with that, right? Because that's not all happening, right? Also, a way that every organization doesn't get the final say in what's classified, which is a huge problem here, by the way, because anything that's classified can't be shared, and of course everybody classifies everything, so how does that get fixed? And then another entity called the NKIC, which is supposed to be the mechanism through which industry will share to government and vice versa. So there's progress being made in this front, but ultimately I'm pretty sure it will be a two-way street for for unclassified information.
All right, next question, and this is unfortunately the last one.
Hey there, my name's Anson. I have a question for you guys, which is we know that there are thousands of companies that are out there that are trying to disrupt the space. And we know that cybersecurity changes every 2 or 3 years, and there's a slight quantum leap that happens, like Palo Alto coming out for firewalls, for application firewalls. What do you fear most that's going to disrupt your space? Or do you see some type of technology that you think is really out there, and maybe you can describe that?
Look, I mean, we
predict your own decline.
Yeah.
Publicly, yeah.
Our industry is built on innovation. I mean, I don't fear it. Like, I don't fear innovation happening in our industry. I think it's something that in some ways, I think it's what I love about being in technology. And it's why I've actually moved out to California 5 years ago so I could be part of this ecosystem. So in my mind, I don't fear innovation. I think, we should embrace it. It's kind of, I think it helps us kind of get out of bed every morning. So I'm not worried about it. I think it's a good thing if we've come up with new ways to solve problems. I think Mike said it well a little bit earlier about how difficult it is going to be, though, for the companies that are trying to go after this problem with more and more point solutions, because more complexity isn't going to help anything.
Yeah, definitely, in security, keep up the change, keep up the innovation is very important, and because these things happen so quick in this space, and that's where a lot of bigger company, when they get bigger, is a slow on the innovation, starting falling behind, and also a few, especially in this space, is stay hands-on involved in the technical things.
actually will get you to see the picture better, and also more close to the customer, also much important, because innovation is the key in this space, and you always need to keeping hands-on involved, and eventually you can build the best product in the cutting-edge product.
I think at Silicon Valley we love to celebrate the startup and what's happening that's innovative, but I bet if we had the time, we could each talk for an hour on what's the innovative things that are happening in our company. So it's happening in large companies too. You don't have to look very far. Apple. It's happening in Silicon Valley in total and even broader around the world. So I love startups, but they don't have a lock on innovation. It's happening everywhere around us. We couldn't survive as companies if we weren't actively fostering that innovation inside the companies as well as studying what's going on outside.
And I fear bloggers. So.
We all have our threats.
I'd like to thank our speakers for sharing your perspectives so freely and for the humor to boot. I'm sure everybody appreciates that. And Danny for leading the conversation so well. As a very small token of our appreciation, we have for you the Churchill Club speaker T-shirt. A recording of this program will be available shortly on our YouTube channel, where you will find recordings of most of our other programs as well. We hope you find that to be a useful resource. And you have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. See you next time. Good night.